Greetings, everyone. I have returned once again. As you all know, Episode 8 continued the famous streak of proving me right. Because, of course, everyone chooses to doubt me, but when push comes to shove, it's always me that's correct in these stupid arguments. You have no idea. You have no idea how frustrating some of these people are. One person insists on claiming that I got things like sin destroying the planet wrong, even though we literally see it in the first minute of the episode. And there were people who doubted that V would come back for some inane reason and said that we were all coping. When, would you look at that, V also comes back very early into the episode. And really, I must say, V returning was handled really well. I knew it was going to happen, but I figured that it would ruin V's character arc. But I've just gotta say it was handled perfectly. The entire point of V's character arc prior, and the fact that she was secretly suicidal, really, it was perfectly contradicted by Jay's line about how there's no escape, even in death. That is how you close, and that's how you bring V back without ruining her character arc. Liam did an absolute perfect job, and made what I thought would be a horrible miss. He just made that land. But this isn't about my opinion on those things in this video. It's not about the idiots who, once again, despite being so hostile about my opinions, ended up being completely wrong. This video, rather, is about a topic that's very special to me. It's a very close topic to my heart. I know that is the dumbest thing I could have said, but whatever. Anyway, this video is about whether Sin from Murder Drones has Asperger's syndrome or not. And before I get started, a large portion of y'all aren't subscribed. And as you know, I'm not just going to let everyone get away with that. I'm going to pull the average generic channel thing that people say before they start the video. So go subscribe, like, and comment, share the videos. We gotta know. We gotta make sure that I hit 500 subscribers, so then I can start to slowly profit off of these videos. Texas Tech, here we go. I will get there Sunday. Anyway, now that all that's out of the way, the thing is, Sin has always been a weirdly relatable character. I haven't really said anything about it because I didn't want to sound crazy, or I didn't want to sound like some edgelord who relates to a psychopathic eldritch robot. But I've recently figured out why Sin is so relatable. Sin consistently showcases several symptoms of Asperger's syndrome. For those who don't know, Asperger's syndrome is basically a form of high-functioning autism. It has since then been its name has been changed to just autism spectrum disorder, because the term Asperger's was named after a Nazi, and some people consider that offensive. Personally, that's what it was called when I was diagnosed with it, or at least that's what they called it when I was diagnosed. So, if anyone takes offense to it, fuck you. I am pronouncing it how I have been introduced to it. And that is that. Anyway, the thing is, it has a lot of very specific symptoms. It is not commonly shared among other things, though obviously some people do have other conditions because with these mental things, everything's psychological. It's kind of a situation where you have one, you got 50 others. Each one makes it so that you're more likely to have other mental issues or other mental impairments of sorts. But I'm going to state this before we continue. There is a very common misconception that having autism automatically makes you stupid or makes it so that you hardly function as human beings, but that is not the case at all. I'm going to mention this because I can bet there are going to be some people who are going to try to claim that Sin is too smart to have autism, or to have Asperger's syndrome specifically. And the thing here is, it is Asperger's syndrome disorder. Autism spectrum disorder is a spectrum, as the name implies. Not everyone is majorly damaged by it in that regard. It's a little bit of a complicated case. For example, Asperger's syndrome, its official classification now is just autism spectrum disorder without mental impairment. Which is the case. People with Asperger's syndrome aren't necessarily dumber in any regard. In fact, it's known to increase certain forms of intelligence. For example, analytics, stuff like that, numerical things, being able to measure that stuff, logical reasoning skill. All of those are heavily increased, or not heavily increased, but there's a correlation with an increased amount, you know? It basically just switches up where your skills or intelligence is centralized, where all of it is mainly in place. Meanwhile, obviously socially, I'm just not there. It's just not something I really care about, and I tend to be more on the introvert side. Now, how is this relevant to sin? Well, simply, all of these are things that could be used against I guess it could be used as an argument against sin having it. But because of these circumstances, the things I listed, it doesn't work really as a counterpoint. Now, what symptoms does sin share, you may ask? For one, very limited facial expressions. Sure, she does have different ones. She smiled a lot in the series. She's had this anxious or nervous look. Sin has even seemed annoyed sometimes. But that's just 3 specific expressions that you can actually explain, that you can actually say a name to. I can't remember a single time where Sin has had some emotion other than this form of manic joy or excitement, this annoyance, or her own form of nervousness. Which I should mention, the only time she's shown that face was in a large crowd back in the Elliott Mansion in episode 5, Home, which can correlate to a form of social anxiety as well, which is also a symptom. Another important symptom to note is repetitive body language such as hand movements. Do I really need to explain this one, or does it go without saying? Because even when pretending to be Tessa, Sin always has her hand hanging down in front of her. She always has her hands kind of hanging down like a raptor in front of her. Not only does she always hold her hands like that, even when Uzi ate Sin's singularity, she immediately started doing that exact same thing as well, implying that it has something to do with coding, meaning it's, in a way, their equivalent of a genetic trait. Autism is genetic, so it would make sense for that to be a symptom that's passed down. On top of this, for one, we all know Sin wasn't treated as normal from the start. Which, this is a bit of a weak detail, but I kind of feel like that particularly sticks out because people tend to not treat autism as a normal thing. I mean, technically it isn't, but that's just how it works. It's not something everyone has by default. It's not what the mind defaults to, so it tends to be portrayed as weird in a way. Which I'm not even saying that Glitch was malicious in that regard. I'm just saying that's generally how it's taken. That technically is correct, so it would make sense for Sin to be portrayed a little weirdly, especially considering that it's not these traits that demonize a character, rather Sin's actions and overall inability to care about those actions. Another big thing is, again, the whole logical reason, the whole skew towards specific parts and intelligence. Sin does not seem like a very emotionally intelligent character or mature character. I feel like that goes without saying. There's a reason people meme about the character being silly. It's because Sin makes no sense on that level. Sin is just kind of always overly joyful about the most crazy things and is manipulative, and she even does mind games, but personality-wise, she kind of just doesn't have that same self-exploration or self-discovery level that every other character is known for, which is definitely deliberate, given that every character, even side characters, have had some degree of that unless they were killed the first episode they were introduced. Actually, never mind, Ron is a bit of an exception, but you see what I mean. Episode 2 was one of the weaker episodes in our regard anyway, so that one can technically be considered an exception, character-wise. Now, anyway, another very common symptom is talking in a dull, robotic-sounding voice. Which, I mean, come on, that is literally the first thing that's supposed to hook you to Sin's character, aside from the whole Eldritch theme.
Sorry, boss. Corporate's spoken. Sin! If that little butler dies for your sake, I swear!
I have backups. You will not have to discard your pets, and I will not discard you. Best stay away from the gala, though. You seem squeamish. Squirmy worm. God forbid it.
Go long, Uzi!
I will. Floozy's not here.
That's what really was so interesting about Sin in the first place. It's what really made her go from a normal mystery introduced by the series to an actual interesting character. And that's what made it so exciting to see everything that Sin did and to slowly be introduced to more and more of Sin's personality and character. But anyway, people have tried arguing that this is just because of a solver, which, let's say, that is true. It is true that the solver is why Sin talks like that. But have you considered something? Have you all considered that the solver is explicitly from AI damages? AI damages, it's a mistake, it's a mutation from damage to their minds. You know, that's just like a form of mental impairment or a disorder in a way. In a way, the solver actually itself is quite similar to Asperger's. And am I saying that the absolute solver is autism or any form of Asperger's? No, but I'm saying it in a way comes off as an allegory for it, or a parallel, so to speak. So I feel that using it and its involvement in Sin's robotic voice, or AI voice, is not a good counter-argument. I feel like it's very much an intentional connection there. And if that sounds like a reach, then I'd love to talk with people in the comments about this and see why it comes off as a reach. Because we all know Liam's writing is very well thought out and deep. It's very specific with very intricate and deep plot lines and overall character writing. So I feel like this is something that he wouldn't overlook, though I could see many other channels or series being made by creators that didn't have stuff like this in mind. Anyway, there's also a bit of an interesting detail which Sin does not seem to be particularly interested in anyone aside from Min. Sin seems to be very, I guess, closed off from others. Sure, she ended up killing all humans anyway, so there's obviously not many people for her to interact with, but before then, you could tell that she only cared about, and mainly, V and J were also there, but obviously there was tension between her and J, because Tessa and J were the ones that kept locking her in the basement, and V was just always offline. Anyway, it's also notable that Sin seems to have a bit of an obsession. She's constantly just always trying to get N, V, and J to work for her. She doesn't seem to care or empathize with the fact that they're absolutely horrified at everything that she's done. And that at this point, she's clearly demonizing herself in their eyes. She doesn't care or doesn't have the emotional intelligence to really perceive this. Rather, she just doesn't care and continues manipulating them in the cruelest and most petty ways while using the threat of basically killing them and bringing them back repeatedly as, I guess, a bit of a defense from them refusing or trying to rebel. Thing is, I'm also sure a lot of people are going to complain that if Sin does have Asperger's and she's the villain, that suddenly that means that they're being malicious towards people with autism or anything like that, but I'm telling you, as someone who has it, that would not be malicious whatsoever. In fact, just her consistent growth as a character, or not growth per se, but her consistent portrayal as a character, has nothing to do with autism. While it seems pretty heavily implied that she has it, I am not saying that her actions are because of that. Because they aren't. The way I see it, autism, or Asperger specifically at the very least, has absolutely nothing to do with the majority of things I do in life. It has everything to do with how your brain is wired, but it really doesn't have much of an effect on my life. And I don't think Sin is that way either. Anyway, overall, Sin's lack of empathy, repetitive gestures, interestingly skewed intelligence, and robotic sounding voice, as well as the subtleties I've already mentioned, the lack of expressions, for the most part, only having 3 that I can really list, and showing, in a way, a form of social anxiety, which I actually think I trailed off when speaking of. I did cut myself off when I talked about her being locked in a basement by Jay and Tessa, but my point there was that even despite all of that, she was still anxious around people before she actually killed everyone. She still clearly was not trying to talk to them. And I get it, humans are scummy in there, but regardless, it kind of all goes together. It really, these things individually, would they be some smoking gun argument? No. Do I think anything here alone proves a point? No. But everything together just adds up. And I feel like it particularly enhances Sin's character. Because if it's true, it is the absolute perfect way a character with autism could be handled. Does it change the character all of a sudden? No, it just leads to a further and deeper understanding. Does it demonize it or in any way or make people with autism out to be perfect? No, it does not. Is it some insane detail that completely changes the character itself and how it's viewed? Does it suddenly just absolutely change the character and the context of a show? No, it enhances, it adds to that. Which I feel like is the best thing. When you change a character, when instead of changing a character, you add to the character. I get it, less is more sometimes, but when it comes to Sin, when it comes to depth, I feel like more is always the best approach. Sin is such a complex character, and I still feel like we haven't scratched the surface. I'm actually going to have another video about Sin later, and about why she's the perfect antagonist, and I'd say the best modern villain in fiction. But I think you all get what I mean. Sin just benefits overall from it character-wise. It's also debatable whether characters like N, Uzi, V, or Doll have it. I'm not going to touch on this in this video because I personally didn't relate to them as much, so I don't really feel like there's as strong of a connection with them and autism personally, but Sin just in particular stood out to me in that regard. And that's why I'm so confident that she does. I'm not the kind to project things. I'm not the kind to project mental conditions, especially. In fact, I get really annoyed and cringe when people randomly say that some fictional character has autism or Asperger's vaguely off of a few specific symptoms. But in the case of Sin, it feels like there are so many symptoms that are so specific and so obvious that I really just can't seem to shake the feeling that she has it. And they're so well introduced, or so subtly shown, without any form of emphasis on them directly, that I feel like that also is an accurate interpretation of autism. I mean, I relate to a lot of his stuff, such as repetitive body language. Sometimes my voice is a little monotone. I'm not the best in public, particularly around other people. When there's a large enough group, my mind absolutely goes haywire and I can hardly control what I think, to a point where a bunch of nonsensical stuff that I hate is constantly playing on loop in my mind in public. I feel like I actually do have quite a bit of emotional intelligence and self-discovery and empathy as well, but, I don't have literally everything. And my intelligence overall is definitely skewed for logical reasoning and other forms of things in that regard. Plus, I have this tendency to be obsessed with certain things and spend way more time into that than I would for other things, to get way more caught up on those than other things. And I tend to ramble on to people about these things and not realize that nobody cares, not realize that nobody is paying attention. These are all just, I'm doing that right now, are I not? I can't believe it took me that long to catch myself there. But you get what I mean. I personally have experienced a lot of this stuff, and it's introduced with Sin in a way that just feels natural. I will be ending this video here. I think I left out a symptom or two that she shares, and I've definitely left out a few that are more vague, but you kind of get it. I've also left out things that are very common in other forms of mental conditions, because those wouldn't quite be good for evidencing Asperger's specifically.